So as it's Le Mans week, I've been doing some bits and pieces on the historical stuff that's happened through the years. Now, Le Mans is a race of tradition, a bit like Indianapolis and also the Monaco Grand Prix, and that's probably why they formed motor racing's so-called Triple Crown. Two that remain are the waving of the French flag to start the race and also a Catholic Mass held at a chapel on site at the circuit. Now, it's not the original chapel, though. One was destroyed during World War II, a second had to be demolished when they made the track improvements, and the third was built in 2010, and it's located somewhere between the famous Dunlop Bridge and Tetra Rouge Corner, so, near to the pit lane and the main grandstands. During the 2011 race, a French bishop visited the chapel to dedicate it, and then less than 10 minutes after that dedication, there was a massive accident in which everybody walked away. It's a miracle! So those are two that remain, but one that has long since disappeared is probably the most famous of them all, the Le Mans Start, which was so famous it was called the Le Mans Start. The Le Mans Start is one of those things that was very of its time when you think about it. Standing starts like they do for Formula 1 and other racing series? Nah, that's not cool enough. That's not spectacular enough. What Le Mans would do is take the standing start and make it, well, a bit more dangerous. Now, I can't find where this whole thing started or who came up with the idea, but it must have been drawn up right at the beginning when the race was first proposed. And sure enough, the first time this method was used was in the first race back in 1923. Drivers stood at one side of the track and watched for the French tricolour to drop. They then sprint across from one side of the track to the other, jump into their waiting cars, start them up, and then race for 24 hours. And while this start procedure was in effect, the car makers and drivers started to come up with nifty little ideas to try and make the start a bit quicker. Porsche, for instance, installed the ignition key on the left-hand side of the steering wheel on left-hand drive cars, so the driver could step into the car, put his left foot down on the clutch, use his right hand to put it into first, and use his left hand to start the engine. If the driver was quick enough, it would shave off a decent chunk of time off the start and maybe grab a few positions. Somebody should have probably told them that it's a 24-hour race and you don't win it at the start. Stirling Moss had a different way of doing things. He'd have the car waiting for him already in first gear and would effectively bump start it to save time. As you can imagine, this wasn't particularly safe with all of these drivers running across the track and so many cars trying to make a getaway all at once. But weirdly, nobody was ever run over or killed at the actual start of the Le Mans race using this starting method. Drivers had been killed in testing and practice sessions in 1965, 66, 67 and 69, but prior to 1969 the last death in the race was 1963, and that occurred 6 hours into the race. The one previous to that in 1958 occurred 7 hours into the race. Concerns were raised during the late 1960s that some drivers at the start weren't doing their seatbelts up properly or just flat out neglecting to put their seatbelts on because it took too much time. There are stories that need verifying of drivers trying to do them up on the Mulsanne straight and the other straights at Le Mans, and also just waiting until they come in for a pit stop to get them put on. But yeah, it was just crazy what they were doing. During the 1968 24 Hours of Le Mans, Willie Mayress had crashed his car on the Mulsanne while trying to close his door, which had come open, just like Ken Miles had 2 years earlier in 1966. Mayress crashed and it ended his racing career, and he would commit suicide in a hotel room a year later. This, and what happened on the first lap of the 1969 edition, are the only two I can find that are a direct result of the start being as it was. Prior to the 1969 race, Lucien Bianchi, who is a relative of Jules, it's his great uncle, was killed testing an Alfa Romeo, and 60 cars were going to be taking the start of the 1969 race, which meant a lot of cars trying to get away all at the same time. Enter Jacky Ickx, the Belgian racing star who didn't achieve much in Formula 1 but would go on to achieve a lot in other forms of motorsport. Now, Jacky was not in a good place at the time, given over the sort of last year and a bit, Jim Clark, Ludovico Scarfiotti, Mike Spence and Lucien Bianchi had all been killed, and his former teammate Mayress had been involved in a career-ending accident the year before, and Ickx knew that the crash and what led up to it were a result of this Le Mans start. So in protest of this dangerous start and what it could ultimately lead to, Ickx decided that he was going to show the ACO that he wasn't happy. While all the other drivers were sprinting to their cars and driving off, Ickx walked to his GT40. There is a photo of it online that I wish I could show you, but I can't because of rules. It was just as dangerous as the start would be normally because 38 other cars had to get past Ickx to get racing. And it's quite an iconic photo. You see everybody either in or getting into their cars, and there's Ickx just going for a stroll. Jacky took the time to make sure the door was shut, his belts were on, and he was by far the last person to leave the start line. The car that had started on pole and immediately flown off into the lead was the Porsche 917 of Rolf Stommelen, and the 917 was by far the best car on the grid, given it had set the pole time by 4 seconds, and another 917 in second place was still 3 seconds from the third Porsche, this time a 908. Porsche had also dominated the season and were already the champions of the 1969 World Sports Car Championship, given they'd won the last 5 rounds in a row. And someone taking advantage of the fact that Porsche was a brilliant car was British gentleman racer John Wolfe, and he'd bought one of these cars and entered it, but hadn't really had much time to practice and get used to the car. Plans were to put his more experienced teammate in for the start, but in the end Wolfe was the one to start the race. But coming through Maison Blanche, which today isn't part of the modern track, it's sort of in the region of the Porsche curves, Wolfe dropped a wheel onto the grass and was ejected from the car as it spun. The car rolled and exploded, with the fuel tank being sent into the middle of the track. The fuel tank was hit by Chris Amon's Ferrari, which also caught on fire, and Amon was able to get the fire extinguishers on in his Ferrari and later get out with just some mild burns. Wolfe was taken to hospital by a helicopter, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. It was the shock that Le Mans needed. Wolfe, who had done things in the traditional way, was dead after less than a lap. Ickx, who had started dead last doing things the proper way, won the race. For the following year, sprinting to the cars was abolished and the cars lined up as they did before, with the drivers already in their cars. For 1971 though, the circuit installed a proper pit wall to separate the pits from the track and introduced the Indianapolis start, which we today refer to as a simple rolling start, and that has been in use since. And when we look back at the traditional Le Mans start, it is very of its time, and with Formula One going on its own mammoth safety crusade, the other motorsports couldn't bury their heads in the sand. And weirdly, it was one of the drivers who was initially opposed to Jackie Stewart who got it all changed. So then, a quick look at the traditional Le Mans start and how it was changed into what we know today. If you've learned something new here today, then give the video a like, and if you want to see more stuff from this channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on as well, so you never miss out on any future content. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support me at a more personal level, you can join the people on your screen by following the link down in the description, as well as also finding links there to Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.